To discuss this, we're now joined by Jason Unruhe, who is a political commentator. He is joining us live now from Niagara Falls. Jason, thanks for joining us. As we continue to see, Jason, these rallies in support of the establishment here in the Islamic Republic, I was wondering what your thoughts are at this time as Iranians continue to pledge allegiance to their governing system.
I think that the Iranian people are definitely on the side of the rule of law and order. They're definitely concerned with trying to keep their legitimate concerns at the forefront of these protests, as opposed to them being hijacked by the uh, agent provocateurs that are being sent in by other countries to try to steal away the people's righteous anger and use them for their own purposes of trying to twist what is a real act, a desire to see some kind of change, into this whole tremendous, big blown up into this whole color revolution seeming like situation. I think that as the pro-government protesters are increasing, I think it sends a definite message to the agent provocateurs and the imperialist countries around the world that they're not going to end up the same way that Syria did or Libya did in this situation, because Iran is very different from the aforementioned countries. Iran is a much more stable, a much more cohesive society, one that doesn't suffer from many of the antagonisms that a lot of these other countries did settle for. There's a great rule of law available for these people. They are a legitimate democracy that allows some kind of outlet for disagreements among the populations, contradictions between various groups in the country, to have some kind of mechanism by which that these disagreements can be settled. So I think it's very much a different situation than what is being portrayed by the imperialist media. These government protesters seem to be, the pro-government protesters seem to be increasing in numbers, increasing in public support, while the acts of the agent provocateurs seem to be shrinking in physical numbers of people, but perhaps are becoming more desperate to try to incite something much bigger. And I think that very much speaks volumes about the situation in Iran right now.
It's interesting, isn't it, Jason, that obviously the voices of criticism towards the Islamic Republic come from those very quarters which say they want to promote democracy throughout the world. It's confusing, isn't it? Because then if Iranians were really practicing their democratic rights within the Islamic Republic peacefully, obviously, originally, why did those countries that want to promote democracy then, why did they feel the need to take over and sabotage that very democratic right?
Because I don't think that they really are interested in promoting democratic rights. The United States and many of those on the same imperialist platform certainly do want to see a destabilization of Iran into another situation like Syria, into another one like Libya. There's no real desire to promote democracy or, a freedom to choose or any kind of, very American rhetoric. If that were true, then they would leave the Iranian people to make that decision among themselves. They would leave them to make those protests against any grievances that they have against the government or the prevailing situation. If they really cared, a lot of the economic concerns of the people who began protesting could be alleviated by simply removing the sanctions that have been placed against the country by the imperialist powers. But that's not the case. That's not what they're there for. They're there to try to antagonize the situation and try to make it blow up into something it's not. There is never really been a concern for freedom and democracy from the United States, but these countries, even going so far back as the Vietnam War. They claimed it was about supporting freedom and democracy against a Soviet-backed government in the North, yet they installed a pure dictatorship in President Xi. It's just completely false that there's this great concern from the great benevolent American superpower for people to have freedom and democracy around the world, when the United States has certainly been one of the most negative effects for freedom and democracy. I'm reminded of an old saying, what is the ability to vote to a man who has no bread to eat?
We have about a minute and a half left, Jason. I wanted to get your final thoughts. Then, because you mentioned dictatorship. It's interesting, isn't it, that the West finds itself aligned with an anti-Iran terrorist group such as the Mujahideen al-Khalq, and secondly, it also finds itself aligned with the previous Iranian dictator, the Shah's son. As far as what their sentiments are towards those riots, that violence, that vandalism, that's an odd grouping, isn't it? If again, if we take their words at face value that they still believe in freedoms, why would you align yourself with terrorists and a dictator?
And if you really believed in freedom and democracy, why would they side themselves with the Saudi government? It's very blatantly obvious that these are very hollow words by the United States. There's very certainly clear no real desire or any concern for the Iranian people whatsoever. They only see them as a tool to use to try to cause the destabilization of their society. And that's par for the course for the way the United States has interfered in many countries around the world.
Okay, Jason, we'll leave there at that. But of course, we do appreciate you taking time out to speak to us here at Press TV and sharing your thoughts with us. Of course,